Okay, welcome everybody to yet another My Pinnacle Network webinar. This one is called 3 Critical Ways to Avoid Being Hacked. We have our 3 IT guys from 3 of our groups. We have Will MacFee from System Support Corporation. He's in the My Pinnacle Network Marshfield group. We have Kevin Martin from Nerds to Go from our My Pinnacle Network Mansfield group. And then last, but certainly not least, Paul LaFlamme of Centrend from the what I think is the best My Pinnacle Network group, My Pinnacle Network Westboro. Additionally, we have a group in Newton's My Pinnacle Network Newton. So Steve and I mean, my partner, Steve Dubin, one of the 3 partners from My Pinnacle Network, we had the thought that, boy, there's a lot of ways things can go kaflooey. Both of us have called each other and like, oh, I've got this going wrong or this going wrong with my computer. And we thought, hey, a good webinar would be to have the IT guys from My Pinnacle Network in for a brief presentation, then kind of a panel discussion and some Q&A. So that's what we're doing. And so we'll kick it off here with, I'm not sure which, did you guys flip a coin or 3 coins as to who was going to kick off with a presentation?
No, I thought we would just kind of, find out what people want to hear about from Steve and, questions that he might have gotten in advance of the webinar starting. And I'm going to talk mostly about firewalls and physical security. And I know we each have a piece in this theme that we're presenting here on how to avoid being hacked. So they're kind of all, it's a circle, right? Security is something that you can't take pieces of. You really should apply holistically. So honestly, I don't believe it matters where we start because they're all equally important.
So Joe, maybe I can kick things off a little bit.
Yeah,
one of the things when we're talking about cybersecurity, first of all, it's pretty scary. There are so many different ways for bad actors to infiltrate our businesses. And so what we talk about is something called defense in depth. And when we listen to Bill and Paul and myself, we're going to try and focus on 3 key things. However, there are so many layers that need to be considered. It's kind of a bigger problem. And so one of the things that we talked about at a high level a few weeks ago was that small business is ripe for the picking. Your business is a perfect place for a bad actor to perfect their craft and take advantage of your business. And it doesn't really matter how badly they infiltrate you. They're collecting something. Whatever they collect from you, they're going to try and derive value from, and they're going to try and share that elsewhere. And that makes your business, regardless of its size, vulnerable. And so, Steve, I think what we want to talk about here are maybe a couple of critical things to consider for any business to help them be protected from cyber threats or cyber security problems.
So just a note, Joe will be moderating this because I was up all night greeting my first grandchild and I'm barely alive this morning.
Congratulations.
Oh,
Thank you. So I am the barely coherent person in the background, and I will check for comments that come in and questions so that I can relay them to the panel and to Joe, but Joe will be leading this.
And that's why Joe is a little bit caught off balance, because Steve was caught off balance last night too. Last I heard, young Dubin was going to show up later in April, so you can't plan these things.
Well, I'm just saying, Steve, you can only make that excuse every 9 months. All right.
You're right. Good point. Good point. Thank you.
So, well, I mean, let's kind of start off with, one of the questions that I've received from our our panelist was, what's the most effective way to train employees in cybersecurity? What should you have for cybersecurity if you're a small business? And I offer each panelist, if your take on, what's kind of, if you're a small business with, 1 to 10 employees, whatever, what should you have for cybersecurity?
I feel it should start with physical security and a commercial firewall.
Okay.
How important is physical security? Well, I mean, if someone was to take your device, whether you have a server on premises or it's just your laptop or even your desktop computer, if certain protocols and procedures aren't in place when that occurs, then you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable to someone taking the hard drive out. Even if they don't know your password, they could take the hard drive out, put it in another computer, log in with their own credentials, and read your data. So we have to have physical security locked up, whatever, but we also have to have encryption so that when the data is at rest, someone can't just come along, steal your equipment, take it back to their little dark lab in a mom's basement and pull the data off of there. So I think that's the first thing that I think of.
Yeah, and I think you raise a good point about the firewall. So having a commercial firewall is going to give you a layer of protection at your access to the internet. That is your gateway to the internet. And so Paul mentioned a commercial firewall. Many times you'll see that the operating system says it has a firewall, and it does. Your internet service provider is telling you that their modem has a firewall, and it does. So what's the difference? What do we learn? What have we learned in the industry that lets us know that those firewalls are good starting points for someone that has nothing, but that's really not effective protection. What we know today is that there are countries around the world that are interested in infiltrating the information that we have here in the United States. That information really crosses international boundaries. Because we're having the same problems in other developed nations around the world as well. So this is a well-known and international threat. But our threats are coming from international locations, not necessarily from within the United States. So when you get into commercial firewalls, we start to introduce protection that's called zero-day threat protection. Zero-day means a threat that is identified today is patched and released to your firewall to protect you today. So you are protected as soon as that threat, as soon as there is a solution to protect you from that threat. So that's what Paul was saying about introducing a commercial firewall. That's protection you don't get from your operating system or from your internet service provider's firewall.
Yeah, that's good, Kevin. Thank you. I've got a couple of slides prepared I can show real quick that illustrate with a drawing exactly what we're talking about here in simple terms. Let me share this to you here.
While Paul's bringing that up, I want to echo the comment he had about physical security, because to the question of what do you do for training your employees, the digital world can be really difficult for trying to understand. We're throwing around terms like 0-day, encryption, firewall. These are a lot of things that people have heard the words around, but maybe they don't quite, like, I know what a stock option is, but if I went into my Robinhood account, it can be a little tough for trying to figure out what that is, right? It can be overwhelming. It's a vocabulary term, sure, but you get a little confused. But I like the physical security piece because really the digital world is just a reflection of our physical world. And as we talk about a firewall, I like to map a lot of these things to a physical thing that most people are comfortable with day to day. So a great example of a firewall is that's your front door. That's where the main internet, that's where the outside is coming into something. And that's kind of those walls of your office to the outside. And there's a bunch of different ways to get into an office, right? Especially if you go full Mission Impossible and try and think of all the cool different ways you could get into a building. You can walk in the front door. You could sneak in through the vent. You could, been listening to a history podcast. You could come up through the toilet for if you're really feeling crafty to try and get in somewhere. So really for firewalls, even in the graphic, if it's explained as like a single line, if you think of it more of your office as all the different barriers between the inside of your office of all the stuff that you care about, and then actually passing through those physical things like windows, doors, vents, etc. I'm going to use a lot of those physical security to cybersecurity explanations because, and to Kevin's point about defense in depth, you really have to make sure about, you can't just lock the front door and then leave all the windows open. It's kind of like that meme of like the locked gate and then they just walk around because there's no fence.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
so simply stated here then, basic firewalling, you've got what we call a firewall. You've got your private side of the network, so that might be your internet service provider's modem here, and then you've got your own firewall, which is usually provided by the internet service provider or ISP. You've got your hardware like your PC, your phones that might be wireless, they might be hardwired, but regardless, the point is you're protected with this firewall. So what does a firewall actually do? So what it does is, now I flipped it so the private network's over here. Basically, in your private network, you make a request. That request might be a website. It might be a service like Google Drive or something. And then the firewall keeps track of information requests that went out to the public internet. And then it says, yeah, that was requested, so I'm going to allow that answer back in. And it's as simple as that. Anything that tries to approach your systems that were not solicited or asked for get burned by the firewall. That's why we call it a firewall, right? So that would be a basic firewall, your Windows firewall or your internet service provider's firewall. When we talk about a commercial firewall, it adds that extra layer of protection. And what's that extra layer? Well, it's basically the same thing, information requests. It keeps track of who asked for what, and it makes sure nobody that didn't ask for something doesn't get in. But it also checks the response and determines if that response is safe. Should I let this packet back in? Is this going to be safe? Is there a hidden Trojan horse in there that's going to corrupt the private network? So it does some analysis, and the more money you spend, the more analysis it can do to determine, is that response okay? Did I really reach the site that I intended, and is that a legitimate response from that website? So just one more slide here summarizing that. Yeah, Joe, go ahead.
No, finish up and I'll ask my question.
Yeah, so here's kind of a quick rundown of some examples of things that would be questionable responses that it's not going to allow in. With a commercial firewall, that a provider's firewall will think nothing of it. So an unrequested info trying to enter, sure, they both block that. That's basic firewalling. But a response like you put in ups.com, but you actually put in upss.com, and now you think you're on UPS, but you're not. Simple example there, it's going to stop that. A virus in the attachment. So you're downloading a file through your email account. There's a virus in it. Commercial firewall will detect that. A poisoned ad on a website. Sometimes you don't even have to click on something to get infected. All you have to do is put your mouse over it. It's called a mouse over attack. And that commercial firewall will stop those bad actors from exploiting websites that aren't paying attention to the quality of the ads they have on them. There's a few more examples you can see here. If it's a site that's dangerous to surf at, if it's access from foreign countries that you don't need to allow, if you don't do business internationally, no need to have China or Russia knocking on your door, right? So those are the kinds of things that a commercial firewall can give you tremendous value in terms of protection.
Yeah, that's great stuff. Joe, you had a question?
Well, yeah. So just to clarify, so physical security is this would not be considered physical security. This is a virtual security thing.
It's digital security. It's a physical appliance that we're proposing that these small businesses should have, but it is a logical or digital blocking, right?
So the layperson would think, like myself, physical security is, I need cameras and stuff to protect my office space.
Right.
Whereas this is this is actually digital security. So
That's
it's
right.
just to clarify. Ed Grant has a question. Ed, go ahead.
Thanks, Joe. Hey, guys, good stuff here. I get confused by the difference between what you just described in the commercial firewall and what like McAfee provides for safe search and virus protection and things like that. Can you contrast those two for me and for the group?
Yeah, McAfee will block things after it's already in your computer trying to do damage. The firewall is going to stop it right at the doorway and not even let it in.
Great.
I think
Great.
that's the simplest way to explain it.
Yeah,
Awesome.
the-
Thank you.
The other thing you need to be aware of when you're using products like McAfee, Norton antivirus, things like that. One, yes, they've already come in the door, but they also have relationships that allow them to hold their pricing down, and they allow outside partners to come in to your system. And sometimes by signing that agreement that says, I understand the terms of this agreement, we open the door for these. Well, wait a minute. I thought Norton was taking care of me, but Norton has decided to have relationships with their partners who have relationships with their partners. And suddenly this web is bigger than we anticipated. And all of that, as Paul just articulated, it's coming in. And now something on your internal computer, which we'll probably get to in a minute, has to deal with that thing that was allowed in.
That's it.
Okay. You're, I don't know what you're segueing to. I'm hoping it's the virtual private network or VPN, or is that firewall? Is that considered the same thing?
Yeah,
Firewall
so
and
a VPN will be used with a commercial firewall or without it. There's different ways that you use a VPN. A VPN can provide outside access to your private network in a secure manner, but it can also simply run on your laptop while you're at an internet cafe and protect you by anonymizing your activity so that no one can see what you're doing, where you're going. No one can intercept any packets that you might be communicating. If you're doing banking at Starbucks, you want a VPN before you start doing that stuff.
Although banking is a good example that you have to be careful with when you're using your personal VPN for anonymity. You may not pass the security protocols of your bank or your retirement account provider, or if you're a financial planner, you're not going to get out to your cloud-based services if you're anonymous coming in, because they don't recognize you for who you are. And so it can work against you. You do need to be conscious that a VPN makes you anonymous, and that can be a detriment depending on what you're trying to complete.
And especially for VPNs, as we're talking about firewalls here, is your firewall is here for your office, right? So as we're talking about doing work in other places, here in my office, I know that I've got a locked door, I've got locked windows. Yeah, I know that I have certain physical security things in place, that the banking information that's here in my desk for tax returns and all the other juicy stuff that my business has lives right here in my locked drawer that's a couple locks deep if somebody nefarious wanted to come in off the street and take it. But when I leave the office, aka I leave the firewall, and I've got those documents with me, how do I still ensure the privacy and how do I ensure the confidentiality and the integrity and the availability of those documents once I leave the office? If I've got a folder with all that and, I'm at a cafe, I leave it down there and I turn around to say hi to Steve, who just walked into Kiskadee Coffee. I congratulate him. How do I make sure somebody's not giving me a little peek over to see what I've got going on for the documents? So the VPN can perform some of that similar firewall piece while you're out and about. The easiest way to think of it is around the device or computer that you're working, wraps it in a little bit of a bubble of the going in and going out, and your traffic, instead of hitting the router and then kind of looking around to see where it's at, it goes straight back to a central source and that performs the same firewall filtering at that central source. And the central source could be your own office. We have clients that VPN back to their own office because there's certain resources and digital file cabinets they have to get to there. Or you go to a third-party service, NordVPN. When you're using Nord, you're just using someone else's firewall. And again, to some of those commercial services, be wary a little bit. They are companies. You might not be the most important client that you have, that they have rather.
A
But
lot of really good stuff in there too. And one thing to keep in mind about NordVPN, did you know that that's a Panama-based solution and that the rules of security in Panama are different than the rules in security here in the United States? So you've signed an agreement with them, with NordVPN. They are considered one of the best residential commercially available VPNs in the world, but their rules are different and they're also attended to differently. So you need to be careful because you're getting in bed with a customer that doesn't base their security and law solutions out of the United States.
So I'm
Yeah,
glad
and
you said I'm sorry. Go ahead, Will.
well,
Finish the thought.
it's a great point too, especially I love the term reasonable assurance of adequate protection. And for a home user, if you think about the important things that you keep at your home, yeah, there's a lot of really important things in there, grandchildren, family heirlooms, etc. But how crazy do you want to get and how expensive do you want to get for being able to protect those things? I don't know about you guys, but I do not have like a retina scanner and a thumbprint scanner to be able to open my guitar case. I got a locked door. I keep it away from the windows. I take some reasonable steps to make sure that the things I care about are not obvious for low-hanging fruit for somebody driving by to grab something. But in the corporate world, you are held responsible for the information you're holding. So, if you have client information, other people's social security numbers, other people's banking information, if you're an attorney, maybe you do not want to broadcast out how messy someone's divorce is going. You need to think about some of those more robust solutions. And the key word to listen for in those would be secure access service edge. That's effectively a VPN on the corporate level for, you can take your laptop, go wherever, you call back to a central location for the appropriate firewall screening of whatever you're doing. So usually a little bit faster than just a straight up VPN.
Yeah, you kind of went where I was going to ask is like the differentiators between somebody who's working in an office. A lot of us are home-based businesses, and what do we need in a home-based business? There's a tendency to think, oh, we don't need all the heavy-duty protection. How right or wrong is that?
If I could jump in here, one of the things that we're talking about from a business perspective is our intellectual property. Will just brought up a bunch of key points about different types of businesses, whether you're a lawyer, a financial planner. All of us are conducting transactions, and those transactions have a value. We need to protect that value. Now, the intellectual property that you create to run your business, it could be a client list. It could be a list of transactional value so that quarter over quarter, how much revenue are you generating? What do you have for contracts with those people that are providing that? That's really the type of information that you need to protect. If you're collecting social security numbers, if you're collecting retirement account numbers, because that's part of your business, all of that intellectual property is ultimately what we need to protect, because that's what we need to sell when we're done working. That's what you're trying to protect. Whether you're turning that over to somebody and they're giving you a check, none of us are going to work forever, and we don't do this for fun. So let's protect all of the good things that we're creating day to day. So Joe, to answer your question, ultimately, we're trying to protect our data. Will brought up some really great points about physical security. Many of you work in the cloud and you save content in the cloud. So what's happening is information is being routed through your location. And we're saying, let's protect that information on the way in. Let's protect it on the way back out to the cloud. Then we've got a couple other things that we need to consider. What I'd like to throw out next as part of a segue is from our firewall, we're managing communication every single day. And what do you think your primary communication method is every single day? I'm going to defer to Will real quick. How are we communicating?
Gonna be email.
100%. And who are the users of email? Our
Everybody.
employees, our customers, and you know what they all have in common? They're human. And they're going to be curious and they're going to click on something and they're going to inadvertently find a problem. And so, Joe, I think you kicked this off at the very beginning and you were asking about how do we train our people? And so maybe now that we've come through the firewall and we're getting information to come to our computer, maybe we should spend a couple minutes talking about training our people.
You read my mind, Kevin.
That's
any,
For you, Joe.
any
I'm here
panelists
for
may
you.
jump in.
So I like for training, I think for a lot of organizations it can become a, oh yeah, shoot, we got to do that. So I am heavily in favor of any type of automated sign up for something, keep it going. And also too, it's important for leaders in the organization at every level to take it seriously. Because if the approach to cybersecurity is, yeah, I mean, I guess we got to do it. You know, the insurance company said we had to do it in order to get our policy. And it's very dismissive. That's going to permeate through the organization at a cultural level. Taking it seriously by talking about it at least like, hey, I saw something in the news that MGM Grand was popped because somebody called the help desk and with the appropriate sounding voice pretended to be a new employee and reset a password. You know, hey guys, trust but verify. Make sure that it's actually Jim on the other side. Hit them with the little pithy things for reminding. And then in that same vein of trust but verify, send something out that tests them. For a lot of our clients, we do the automated phishing training. And having that training as an ad hoc and a manual is French for never gets done. So automating it, making sure that it's done every time and that you're really just checking to make sure that it's gone out is great. And then especially too, I mean, don't shame people in the front being like, so we did PR Work Zone this month and Joe clicked on an American Express scam. So shame Joe in front of the rest of the organization. Shame. I mean, as a huge Brene Brown fan, shame isn't really going to work. But hey, you speak with them like, you clicked on this. Do you understand? Hey, do you understand why it was faked? Can you catch the steps as to, hey, it says American Express, but it's at I'm a fake website.co.jp. Like that's not American Express. Come on. Or, hey, I would say spelling mistakes, but in the age of ChatGPT, that's kind of gone away. The AI tools have been perfect for copywriting. No offense, PR Works for copywriting stuff. But if you're a scammer, works great for writing I'm a fake Capital One email. No longer is the poor grammar a barrier to scamming. But being able to recognize it, walking through with the offender as to, hey, did you see why you fell for it? And then, having some remedial training for cleaning up on the other end. And this one is for Kevin and Paul. I know they can confirm this. Guess who's the worst at catching the scam emails?
Right.
CEOs.
Absolutely.
The owner and the CEO overwhelmingly is the worst. And of course, they have the most credentials to the most fun stuff. So you have a combination of the most likely to fall for it and the most valuable target in one beautiful click.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. It doesn't apply to me because I'm at the top type of mentality. I was going to defer something over to Paul and talk a little bit about how many businesses do you know that still use greatestlawyer@gmail.com, Bob's Financial Planning at yahoo.com,
Right.
and a couple of other free emails that are going around. And they've been developing and running their business for many, many years using these free email sites. And Paul, I was curious if you had a comment about that, and specifically in the context of Will's talking about our ability to test and notify people that they are susceptible to these threats coming through in email. But talk a little bit about these email addresses, if you could, Paul.
Sure. Have you ever seen or received a message yourself that said it was from you, your own name with some other crazy address? Well, we can do things about that if you have a domain name. If you're gmail.com, I mean, I could take any one of you right now, take my Gmail account, put your name on it, and send that out as me. And there's not a darn thing we can do to detect that. And there's nothing you can do about it. So yeah, having a domain name and having it protected, and even if you don't have a website, if you just have a splash landing page, if you don't feel your business needs a website, that's your call as the owner. But yeah, having a good brand recognition, all that notwithstanding, good security is to definitely have your own domain name and not use one of those free services.
So just as the technology is changing, almost hourly or daily, so are the ways to infiltrate and to trick. How do you keep your staff up to speed with that? How do you keep your system up to speed with that? And
Yes.
all three of
So
you can jump in on that one.
Yeah, we just covered a couple things, Joe. So the first thing is you need to move to a domain-based email. So PR Works, the first thing that you guys do when you work with a new client is you make sure that they have purchased a domain that represents their company. That's foundation brick number one. Then you may help them build a website. However, us on the IT side, we're using that domain to put these protections that Will was just talking about, so that we can actually automate the process of testing your people, sending in a false indicator, and then tracking. There are 10 people at PR Works. Out of those 10 people, 7 of them clicked on the phishing attempt that Will's automated test sent out. So you're 30% compliant in phishing testing. So 70% of your staff failed the test. And these things happen periodically. And it helps to develop automatic awareness to these types of threats. If you're not expecting an email from that person, then, is it appropriate to open it at this time? Let's say you are expecting an email from that person. There's other threats that happen where someone, especially if you're communicating with someone that uses Yahoo, Gmail, or other mail.com type email addresses, those can be intercepted. There is something called a man-in-the-middle attack that listens for keywords and tricky phrases inside your email communication. Hey, I just need you to send this payment over to. Okay, that looks like a good thing. Payment, that's a good word. Let's grab that. I suddenly respond with, hey, this is Joe. We had a change in our banking today. I'd like you to send that over to this new account. And I'm going to drop Joe DeRamo from my communication and just send that to my client as Joe. And now I have taken over that, and that wire transfer or payment is now being redirected to my bank account. It's called a man-in-the-middle attack, and it's very, very common. So we need to protect against these types of email threats.
And what Kevin is talking about is how real estate closing attorneys get whacked about every day for.
Yeah, the title insurance companies, and absolutely.
Yeah, well, financial planners who are transitioning their account, roll over your 401k with us. Come on over. So let's get that money sent right away. I mean, that could happen to us personally, but if you're the financial planner, Bob financial planner at gmail.com, boy, are you susceptible. And that's an indicator to all of us as people that, that business is probably not as legitimate as I want it to be. So I think, you're going to be evaluated on the outside. I also wanted to pull up a reference that I just received about these emails, which I'm going to go look for real quick so I can read it to the group. But
yeah,
there's some real threats that come through email.
Staying on a quick statistic too is I did a presentation with one of Boston's FBI cyber people, and the FBI overwhelmingly still sees 87% of all breaches still come in through an email that somebody clicks on something. So it's not somebody figuring out a crazy way to inject code into a firewall to circle around the blah, blah. That's not really what most people are doing. Spray and pray marketing emails, click on a link and away you go. And-
An alarming number of those could have been prevented, I'll bet.
Yep.
They just don't have what they should in place.
And I
So,
think
so
for
Say
staying
what?
up to date for staying up to date for threats, there's really two pieces, and I'll use the 80-20 rule. 20% of it, to be perfectly honest, is the automating your protections on the endpoint, making sure patches from the vendor go down and you do those Windows updates. I know they suck, but grit through them, go through, because it prevents that whole code injection to the blah, blah, blah. 80% is stranger danger. The same way you teach a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old of, hey, if somebody comes up to you in the street and says they have candy and puppies in a white van, you don't go with them into the van. So it's that same stranger danger behaviors that you use here in the digital world. Great examples for HR managers. You get an email from a Gmail account. I will pick on my own employee, Josh Smith 8654 at gmail.com, sends an email to my HR manager. Hey, I got a new bank account at Rockland Trust. Here's the routing. I want to change my direct deposit. Stranger danger should kick in and go like, Josh doesn't mention anything about that. Kathy should get up, walk over to the desk and go, hey, Josh, what's going on? Why are you like, is this legit? And he goes, no. So that would be the stranger danger, as opposed to somebody just going, oh yeah, sure, kick it through email, no problem. I'm not going to verify this information that came in. So that whole trust but verify phrase is fantastic, because it's one of those, something comes in and it's like, all right, this could be a legitimate, like, I'm not going to have every single request that comes in to be like, hey, could you change this? And I'd be like, screw them. That's not real. Verify it. The phone is your friend. Getting up and walking over is your friend. And it's, even with the digital world, sometimes a phone call is a little nice. But verifying those requests and things that come in is the best way to do it.
Yep. And so there was some recent changes. I found the paperwork here. It says back in October 2023, Microsoft has been collaborating with other providers to identify that Google and Yahoo have jointly announced new email sender requirements for inbound email to their domains, and that these security features would be put in place in early 2024. It happened in February. So if you're communicating by Google, Yahoo, mail.com, and some of you are probably sending out blast emails where you have multiple people that are on distribution, and they use those emails because that's your client base. You may have a domain, but you're sending it out to your client base. There are new rules that have been put in place that you need to add security features to your DMARC records in your domain so that you can allow some of this communication to happen, not get rejected. This could impact any of us that communicate on a regular basis to clients that use these free emails. So the security requirements are changing, and you will have seen the change as of February 2024. So it's going to impact us email communication wise more and more as we move through this year.
Paul, are there other things people can do with these emails that they're getting to protect themselves? Anything to look for? Things that are just, the proverbial red flag?
Yeah, I mean, the links that are in the page. So I already mentioned how it could be your name and some bogus address that you're getting an email from, right? But the links within the page, if you hover over the link before you click it, in the bottom left, you'll generally be able to see where that's taking you to. So in Will's example about American Express, if that's not clearly an American Express website, don't click it. If you're not sure, then the best thing you could do, like suppose you get an email that says, your American Express account has been compromised. Please log in immediately and change your credentials. Well, rather than do that, go to American Express yourself, right? Just open up a browser, put in the address yourself, and log in with your own credentials. That way you're not clicking the link at all. You're not at risk. You can check the validity of that. And if you see nothing wrong, no red flags in the account, then that was a bogus message that you've just avoided.
I think one of the things users, especially now, I know I get a ton of emails where there's an RE in the subject line, basically implying that, oh, we've had an email conversation going on and I'll just reply to that. that's one thing that really triggers me, and also any type of emoji in the subject line. I know there's various, so it's almost like you have to gauge between what's spam and they're trying to get my business and who's trying to hurt me. And is that even a decision you should be making? Just
I don't think
assume
it
that
is. I think Will was talking about this. Automation is the key. So we've covered a couple key points here. We talked about the firewall, first of all. We've talked about putting some email protection in place. And with email protection, you can add anti-phishing and anti-ransomware protection into that as long as you have a domain email. If you don't, as Paul indicated, we can't protect
That's
you
wrong.
if you're using these free sites to do your business communication. So that's email. Joe, you're pointing out great points. I mean, the things are changing so fast. And quite frankly, who has the time? We're trying to do business here. We're not trying to analyze our email communication. So put the automated protections that Will has mentioned in place and make sure you're protected. But now what we're talking about is communication coming through the firewall, going into our endpoint. Next is endpoint protection and error detection and response to those errors. And guys, Paul, Will, anyone want to grab onto that?
Yeah, I can hit for the endpoint. It comes to that central piece of defense in depth and how something moves through from the outside and then coming to, and when we say endpoint, we really mean the device that's in your hands, or in this case, like keyboard and mouse that I'm working with or whatever. And kind of to some of the things we've hinted at with email domains of, hey, the free or the home or the personal versions aren't really going to get you the level of protection that you need because, I mean, frankly, you kind of get what you pay for, right? So you do want to make sure in a business setting you're using, if you're doing Microsoft, you have the pro level license because it allows a few other settings that you can kind of put together out of the box. And Microsoft as an organization is very hands-off. So they provide the operating system, there's billions of lines of code, there's hundreds of thousands of different settings, and they kind of give it to you and go like this and say, you're responsible for it. That's their business model. And so for the endpoint, some of the must-haves are and best practices is, having a business class threat protection platform. I don't like saying antivirus because when we say antivirus, McAfee, Norton, Symantec comes up, and those really aren't going to give you what you need. Because a big part too, especially as we've hinted at cyber insurance and a lot of other pieces, is that you need a record of what's happened. McAfee's not really doing some type of threat analysis that reports back to some other platform and says, we saw this file, it had this behavior, it did this, kind of think of like a police report. McAfee's not really doing a police report of what bad guy that it caught. The professional threat protection platforms, SentinelOne, Bitdefender, Blackpoint, there's there's hundreds of brands that are out there. It's a pretty saturated space. I personally use SentinelOne, but those things report back and you have a record, effectively a police record of what happened for being able to say, and it might not just be that, when something lands that, hey, this file looks suspicious, it matches a hash of these known bad files. We really move towards behavior of a file. A great example is I'm talking with Steve and we're working on a press release file and we're sending PDFs back and forth of this is what I think my picture should look like in the newspaper. Why did you use the one of when I'm yawning? Can we use one where I'm smiling? And all of a sudden I get a PDF and for some reason this PDF tries to open PowerShell, which is a scripting program on the computer. Why on God's green earth does Adobe Acrobat or a PDF need my scripting program on my computer? As God bless Steve, but I don't think he's that much of a whiz-bang generative content on the endpoint type of guy. But it would be like, why is that happening? How do we block it? And then a PDF itself is not necessarily a harmful file or a known bad hash, but that behavior of going to try and do something else is what you have to defend against. And for the end user, it looks no different in what you're doing. It all tries to run in the background. It's all under the hood stuff, but you need something on the endpoint that is watching, really the behavior of something. Another analogy is, think of like the security guards at Gillette Stadium or at Fenway. When they're looking over the crowd, they're looking at the behavior of people, right? It's not that they're looking out and going like, oh my God, that's the dude who's on the most wanted list. And then they run over and grab him. I mean, yeah, sometimes that happens, but it's not all the time. They're looking for behavior. They're looking for the guy who's always kind of, maybe he keeps looking around, and then the security guard's going to watch him and be like, all right, what's he going to do? Then maybe they notice that he has tearaway pants and tearaway shirt. Hey, wait a minute, that's a little suspicious. And then he starts moving down towards the field. Like, all right, I know what he's going to do. I'm going to go grab him. And that's how the security catches a streaker. So that same process happens in these modern threat protection platforms of watching what something's doing, not rather who it is.
So, Will, you mentioned something off device in hand, and that led me to a question. A lot of us are working on their phones and computers. I think we take for granted or don't even think about the security of our phones when they're coupled with our computers. If the panel wants to address that briefly, and then we're going to turn it over to questions from our audience.
Well, I'll lead off with something that we all should be aware of. To deploy software on an Apple device, you have to be a registered Apple developer. To deploy software onto an Android or other OS device, you don't. And that makes those devices, Android devices as an example, more susceptible to threats than Apple devices. That's not a closed loop system, but that is common within the industry. So you have to be a registered Apple developer. That means that Apple knows who you are when you develop an application. Applications can be used to collect information or manipulate information, just like you use Outlook today, potentially, or your Apple Mail client. Those are applications and therefore intended uses. If someone is deploying software that is not certified, that can go through on an Android and it can be used to collect information. However, you can also deploy threat mitigation software to both your Apple and your Android device to help protect. And so there are variations within the professional endpoint protection that Will was talking about that allow you to run that protection on your mobile device.
Any recommendations for specific applications?
Well, I think we all have access to professional services that we use for endpoint protection. I know the ones that we deploy have mobile device protection as well as our endpoint for PC and Apple products. What I will say is that there are other ways to protect mobile devices, and we get into that with a little bit larger company with protection called mobile device management. It's a little bit heavy for this panel, I think, because it's kind of the next level. Here we're talking about users that are still using Gmail. So they don't even have a domain yet. A lot of the protections are not even in place. If they do have that, and they do have kind of a normal transactional throughput month over month that allows them to have an IT budget, then we would definitely recommend considering something like mobile device management as the protection mechanism to prevent bad actors from deploying software on your mobile devices.
Right. When we
But
talk about
it's kind of next level. So, Paul?
yeah, when we talk about physical security earlier, I didn't mention mobile devices, but tablets and phones, they're encrypted. But if someone is able to compromise that, like, oh, I use the same PIN for my ATM card and my computer and my phone, probably shouldn't do that, but some people do. And if someone is able to guess that it's your anniversary, one of the first things they'll try, or your first child's birthday, and they get into your device, you're compromised and your contacts are susceptible. And so I would recommend, I think all these guys will agree with me, right, that being able to wipe the phone remotely is a powerful feature for mobile device management. But I agree with Kevin, it's more next level stuff. It might not be something that our audience today is interested in, but I think it's good that that exists.
Okay. So I'd like to open up now. If anybody from our audience has questions, either put it in the chat or speak up, since we've got a smaller crowd.
I have a question for you guys. Hi, my name is Cheryl Marley. I'm from Bring It In Media. What are your thoughts on Microsoft 365 and the Defender add-on that they have included in that software for small businesses? That's what our business uses, and I just didn't know if we should have additional protections beyond Microsoft 365 and Defender. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Will kicked it off. So Defender is Microsoft's protection. Some fun facts about Defender. It is the #1 virus protection in the world. The reason it's #1 is because it is the most deployed Defender antivirus protection in the world. We can't overcome that. They are #1. They are also the most hacked virus protection in the world. Why? Because they're deployed everywhere, worldwide. Microsoft, they do have a hands-off, but what Microsoft has done is they continue to develop Defender, but they allow us to run Defender in conjunction with commercial protection. And so my recommendation is always to layer commercial protection with Defender and give the commercial protection the oversight. Let Defender just kind of sit in the background. One of the things that I often hear is, what if I put multiple layers of protection? I've got Defender, I've got McAfee, and I've got some other protection in place. Those things are going to fight with each other, and that's going to cause productivity issues that will impact your business in other ways. Will took some of your thunder there.
For Microsoft Defender and for 365, Kevin's point is 100% that they overwhelmingly have the most data, so they see the most and can do the most. But to my point earlier about Microsoft's model of they give it and go like this, Defender and protections within 365 requires a mechanic. And anybody with admin credentials can be that mechanic, but you have to know with what you're tweaking for it.
Yes. I would agree, because I'm an admin and I'm in the back end and I'm trying to just set up just the different features to make sure that Defender is set up.
Well,
properly.
I'll show you.
I'll
show you like some great examples, especially for 365, because Defender will hit some of the cloud pieces and it'll hit the endpoints. So, Defender can do that central reporting. You can have those different policies to the endpoint, but for 365 out of the box, forwarding outside of your domain is not turned off automatically. So somebody clicks on a link and your account gets compromised, they can forward all your emails to some Gmail account. And unless you have the reporting set up to know that had happened, most of the time you're none the wiser. So that feature is just on out of the box, even though it's quote unquote insecure. Microsoft begrudgingly decided that all accounts need to have security defaults turned on, which is that multi-factor. So you do the password and then you do the code for getting into the email. Like that always wasn't necessarily turned on out of the box. This is one that nobody ever really thinks of is if I'm able to get into your account, I mentioned PowerShell earlier for that scripting and automated pieces. There's a lot of attackers that when they get you to click the link, they run that script to be able to say, who's everybody this person's ever emailed? What do they talk about? And hey, send out this email of like a compromised Dropbox link or whatever. Out of the box, Microsoft leaves that feature on for PowerShell scripting for whoever's email account is active. And the first thing we do is strip that off of everybody who isn't an admin, because admins should be,
And Cheryl, I think part of the solution here is automation again. So your time is valuable, and you probably have a full-time job in addition to your IT, subcomponents. So hand that off to somebody. Put in a commercial set of protections and let the pros kind of manage that. That's also going to connect you to a security operations center. So the stuff that we can't handle on a day-to-day, we can't be everywhere either. So having a certified set of eyes kind of overseeing what that looks like really is protecting your business, and that's something that all businesses should consider.
Okay, so
Paul, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, one last piece for you, Cheryl. If you go to my website at centrend.com and you look at resources in the newsroom, I have in the March newsletter, I wrote about your exact question. Should you go beyond Windows Defender? And you can take a deeper dive on that.
Great.
so
What's up? What's that? Would you mind just dropping that link, Paul, in the chat,
Sure.
if you wouldn't mind?
Sure.
Thank you.
So we're kind of running a little close to our end time here. There was some questions in the chat. I'll just put the panel real quickly. If you could address number one, small business owners wear a lot of hats and cybersecurity seems complicated. What are some signs that it might be time to get some outside advice? Kind of like your quick take on that one.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like I would liken it to when, hey, when should I have an external bookkeeper? If you have some wherewithal for trying to figure out, hey, all right, I do my books and the CPA hasn't really raked me over the coals for, being able to do my books for what I'm doing. Sure. I don't have a background in bookkeeping. I run a flower shop and I seem to be doing all right. It's when that feeling of starting to get out of your depth starts coming up. Maybe you get a cyber insurance renewal and you see like, wow, I don't know what half these words mean. It could be you are starting the business and some of these terms of like, what's an email? What's this? What's that? As soon as you start feeling that unfamiliarity in some terms, it's usually a good idea to loop in an expert. And then finally is just if you have some type of legal requirement, either, again, you're handling personally identifiable information like social security numbers, retirement accounts, banking information, etc. You need an outside third party if you do not have someone who is dedicated in-house to take care of it. Because someone's head is going to hang. And if you have social security numbers and something happens, like we get it, you're a business owner. You have to do sales, marketing, operations, HR, payroll, and bookkeeping, and cybersecurity, and IT endpoint, and customer service, etc. But the IT part can turn into legal very quickly. And so if you have that bullseye on your back, talk to an expert.
Okay.
Hey, Joe, I just
Paul?
wanted to throw something in here because a lot of business owners deal with insurance and they know that they want to insure their business. Cybersecurity, you can purchase cybersecurity insurance and it can be sold. What you should look out for is that you meet a cybersecurity insurance checklist, because if you have cybersecurity insurance and you don't meet the compliance requirements for that insurance, they will not pay a claim to you. So when you sign up for it, it's a great thing to review with your insurance company. Talk it over with Rick Foy and others so that you know what are the requirements that I need to meet for my business to meet the requirements to be paid out. So if my workers can't work, if I can't go into the office, if I can't do my job because of a cyber attack, is the cyber insurance going to pay out to me? And when you review that list and you realize, Cheryl, that your configuration of Defender didn't meet the minimum requirements for endpoint protection, we're not paying out your claim. So now the 5 employees that have been trying to work for the last 5 days because of a cyber threat attack, they're not getting paid. The owners aren't bringing in any transactions. Everything is ground to a halt. And you think your cyber protection is going to pay out to get your business solvent again. Suddenly it's not. It's a great place to start. Talk to your insurance company. Make sure that you meet the minimum requirements for cybersecurity insurance. Whether you actually purchase the insurance or not, it's a great checklist to give a business owner a starting point.
Okay. Well,
Get
thank you,
ahead of
Kevin.
this. I just wanted to say, Joe, get ahead of this, people, because you do not want to get hacked. You don't want the aggravation and the risk. If you think you can't sleep at night because you're worried about different things in your business, believe me, you get hacked. That feeling, there's nothing worse than that.
Yeah, so I think the message has been delivered loud and clear by all 3 of our panelists today to do your due diligence to protect your business, no matter how small or large. I want to thank you three for giving up your time to do this webinar. Appreciate it. Steve, thank you for making it out instead of sleeping. And we will continue this webinar series next month in the upcoming months. What we'll do is we'll send out a recording of this with contact information for all three of these IT professionals. So if you have additional questions, including some of you posted some questions that we didn't get to, again, thanks again, and all have a great day.